Charles C. Johnson. And his new book is called Why Coolidge Matters, Leadership Lessons from America's Most Underrated President. Charles is an investigative journalist and author and a former contributor to the Daily Caller. He has just launched GotNews.com last week, and he spent a lot of time talking about that Mississippi race. He has written for the Wall Street Journal, the New York Post, American Spectator, Claremont Review, and National Review Online, and the Weekly Standard. Charles Johnson's work on exposing corruption and fraud in elections, government, and federal policy has placed him on several national shows and networks, as well as numerous talk radio programs, including I just was listening to a news conference this morning that he was pretty exciting. So please welcome Charles Johnson.
Thank you for having me.
Sure.
Well, thank you so much for having me. I know there are a lot of questions on Mississippi, and we can get to those. I know that there are a lot of people who potentially don't like me because of things I've tweeted, and we'll get into that. We can, smack it around. I know there are a lot of establishment people and then not establishment people, and all the various permutations that exist. But for the moment, because I've been asked to speak about this, and also because it's awesome, I'm talking about my book, Why Coolidge Matters: Leadership Lessons from America's Most Underrated President. Now, you might ask, which a lot of people would, why would somebody in their 20s write a book about the last red-headed president? I mean, it seems like a strange thing to do, doesn't it? And why would somebody in their 20s write about a president who was around in the 1920s? Like, what's the deal? What's this all about? I mean, there's this other Coolidge book, right, Amity Shlaes's, right, who has a certain perspective on Coolidge. I have a different one, which is that Calvin Coolidge, and by the way, this book is one of 3 that's been endorsed by Ted Cruz, who I hope might be another president in the near future. But this book, my basic argument of this book is that history matters, and that there's so much about our history that we, as those of us on the right, know that isn't so, as Reagan put it, and ought to know but don't, because the left controls our curriculums and essentially controls our minds. Now, Coolidge, why is Coolidge interesting? Coolidge lived in a time in which there were riots, there were all these questions about immigration, there were fights with public sector unions. They didn't call them public sector unions then. There were fights about the very nature of government. There were fights over the education. How should our colleges look? What should they be teaching? And he won on every one of these issues. He actually transformed the nature of government. And he used things, this very shy, kind of dry wit of a man, used the technology of his time, radio, to go and get his message out to the whole country. He's the first president to appear on radio, to appear on television, on film. They didn't have television yet in those days. And he's the first president, or the last president, rather, to write his own speeches. And we know that a young man somewhere in the Midwest was listening to him on the radio, and that he actually decided that he would go into radio because of what he heard from Calvin Coolidge. That man, of course, was Ronald Reagan. And Ronald Reagan, of course, took Coolidge's portrait and hung it in the Oval Office. He was criticized. People condemned Reagan for doing this. After all, Coolidge is a do-nothing president, right? That's what we've all been taught in our commie classes, right? I mean, that's what people told us, right? It's basically like Woodrow Wilson, he's awesome, right? World War I, like expansion of government, cool. And then they go into like, oh, those terrible Republicans who used the market, and they basically made mom and pop starve to death, right? I mean, that was the whole Great Depression. Republicans gave us the Great Depression. Let me contend that that is entirely garbage. And we can go into exactly why it's garbage. I go into it at length in my book. But essentially, Coolidge is the last president to pay down the debt. He's the last president to actually massively, during the 1920s, they're one of the most expansionist times in human flourishing, right? We've got literacy rates are increasing. Women are actually involved in the workplace. Coolidge is, at the same time that FDR is insisting that photos of himself with blacks be destroyed, Coolidge is going and partying at the Negro Leagues baseball games. He signs a law that makes Native Americans citizens, and not just makes them citizens, but at the same time he joins Native American tribes, because his argument is if they can join our tribe, I should be able to join their tribe. So we have a long, proud history with Coolidge, and it's my contention that American history runs essentially from the founders through Lincoln to Coolidge, and we can debate Lincoln ad nauseum. I highly recommend Harry Jaffe's work on this. I am, of course, of the Claremont School, which many of you I recommend that you read the Claremont Review of Books. And what essentially happens is Lincoln, then Coolidge, then Reagan, then the Tea Party movement, and then potentially Cruz or Rand or whatever, pick your poison. And that's my kind of contention on history. Now, I am a believing Christian. Coolidge was a believer as well. He was actually one of our most religious presidents. He colored a lot of his speeches with religious allusions. And what he was doing is he made this argument, which I think is essential right now for conservatives to grasp, which is that man has a spiritual nature, and that if you touch the spiritual nature, as he understood it, you can actually transform government. And I know that there are a lot of probably scoffing of our libertarian friends who are, reading Ayn Rand and are atheists and whatever. But nonetheless, I think this is true. This is why Coolidge was able to give speeches in all different audiences and actually win sizable majorities of ethnic groups that had previously never voted Republican again, and that have not voted Republican since Coolidge. And so I think that this kind of approach to politics of, as Coolidge liked to quote it, "You shall know the truth and it shall set you free," that this kind of approach is actually essential for people who are of limited government mindsets. It might surprise you that one of our most religious presidents was also the last president to actually trim government and actually cut government. And he gave a lot of arguments for why this is the case. And this kind of messes with our idea that compassionate conservatives or libertarians and all these different things are all at war with one another. It's not quite the case. Now, I'm happy to kind of go into Coolidge. I'm also happy to go into Mississippi Senate race. Before I go into the Mississippi Senate race, let me say a few things. I've actually been to Mississippi, right? How many people in this room have been to Mississippi, just by a show of hands? Right? Good. So you're not all sucked into the Beltway. This is good. What I would say is that if you saw the racist radio, or heard the racist radio ads, if you heard the robocall, if you saw the flyers, these are all things that I found when I was in Mississippi. I was invited to go down there by the Tea Party Express to embed with them. I wasn't paid, drank a bunch of mint juleps, had a good old time. But I was noticing what was going on in Mississippi, and it disgusted me, because this is a stolen election. And I have lots of documentation that I've been releasing, been helping Matthew Boyle at Breitbart. There's a lot of stuff that will continue to come out. Now, some of my tactics you're probably reading about, they're unorthodox, right? They're probably a little strange, right? Who, after all, sets up a GoFundMe account and encourages people to give him money, some of which he then uses to bribe a reverend to go and tell them about allegations of voter fraud? Kind of a weird thing to do, right? But let me submit to you that there's a lot of stuff that the conservative movement for a long time has played, and they played by certain Marcus of Queensberry rules, and they've been losing. And fight after fight, on issue after issue, we've been losing. And the country reflects our losing. And state after state, county after county, place after place, we lose. And so what we have to do is we have to start thinking strategically. I was a competitive chess player in high school. I played poker, helped pay my way through college playing poker. We need to start being strategic and having fun. And so there's a certain sense to which those of us who are young in the room, we have a certain way in which we can actually change things in this country. And after all, it's going to fall to us. A lot of the folks who are out there now, they're too invested in the system the way it is. And it's going to fall to those of us who have camera phones, the Jameses O'Keeffes of the world, the Hannah Giles of the world, the dearly departed Andrew Breitbarts of the world, who think outside the box about how to solve these problems. Now, I will tell you, I have a lot of material on Menendez that's yet to come. I've helped the FBI on a number of projects. I intend to continue because I believe journalists should first and foremost be after truth and after justice. And so I will continue to help law enforcement as necessary. And I have gotten in contact with the FEC. And my friend Rick Shafton over there in the back, he and I were in front of the national media today doing a press conference showing how the NRSC and how a number of other kind of establishment conservative organizations were violating FEC rules with what they were doing in Mississippi. And all this stuff is coming out. I commend that you come to gotnews.com. I will actually pay you, unlike some other places you could work for. I actually believe in freedom and money, and actually if you do the work, you should probably be paid a just wage. I mean, I know this is a novel concept for a lot of interns. I promise you it gets better. But with that, I'll take some questions. Anything, hit me. Whatever you got, any rumors you heard, let's go. So, anything. Anyone? Yes. And if you'd say your name just so we can be Facebook friends, you could follow me at Chuck C. Johnson, and we can keep this going later. That'd be cool too.
Kevin Baird from Pennsylvania. On Coolidge, he's often known as the Knew Nothing president, and conservatives like that on his domestic policy, But on foreign policy, for right or wrong, he's remembered foreign policy primarily for the Kellogg-Briand Pact, which